But let me give you an example. So I think last time we talked about the ASA is kind of a stateful firewall. It blocks ports and protocols. That's great, but that's kind of yesteryear. What we really need to do is inspect the traffic that's coming through. So a next-gen firewall, and Meraki is that, and the Cisco Firepower is that, it's this next generation, does some advanced things like intrusion prevention, like URL filtering, like malware inspection using AMP. If you look at the Firepower, it does, see, I got to remember again. What did I say, the three things? It does IPS, it does malware inspection, AMP, and it does URL filtering. Then you ask yourself, okay, well, what's the difference? And the major difference between the two is Cisco's Firepowers discover your network. So think of it from a threat example. There are billions, if not zillions, different variants of malware out there, different threats that bad guys can use to attack your network. Well, every packet that comes through a firewall has to be inspected against being that attack. That's an enormous amount of analysis to do. So behind the scenes, I want to do intrusion prevention. I have a list of intrusion prevention attacks that may come against my network. The list that's used on Meraki to evaluate is kind of current events, right? So Imitet has been a very popular attack lately. So Imitet is going to be on that list. But what was it? Stuxnet from 15 years ago is not going to be on that list because it's not something we see in the wild very often. So Meraki's got to make this decision and say, what's my list of threats that are probably going to attack me? I'm still doing IPS, intrusion prevention, but what are those attacks that are going to come and get me? And so I'm going to use the top 100, the top 200 playlist, if you will, of threats that are out there today, September 14th, 2020. And that will change and get updated regularly, but it still is reflective on the whole of what everybody is experiencing out there. A Firepower certainly taps into that database of what's the current threats, but it takes it a step further and it says, what is your network vulnerable to? So if you have a server 2003 or a Windows 2003 server running out there, you may have some vulnerabilities that aren't necessarily in the top 200 list, but are critical for your environment, for your firewall to protect you against. Cisco Firepower uses this concept of network discovery. It's looking at the packets that are being sent back and forth between it. And because of that, it can identify the machines that are behind it and say, okay, I know that these threats, these attacks are successful against the machines that I have behind me. So I'm going to build my list based upon the machines that are behind me. And because of that, it has a greater efficacy rating for preventing threats. Now I use the example of IPS and Emotet, but that's true for malware inspection as well. I've got to have this list of what's the current malware that's out there. And so let me look at my machines behind me and what they would be vulnerable to. So it's a little bit more intelligent application of threat prevention. So that is a major difference for me when looking at Meraki versus Cisco Firepower. Now that's not to say that Meraki does a poor job. I'm still, targeting the threats using the same analysis engine, if you will, that I get out of Firepower. It's the same technology. I still inspect malware the same way. I'm still pulling from the same database. I'm just using a smaller subset, if you will, to inspect the traffic that's coming through. There's a possibility that something on my top 200 over here on Meraki gets bumped for something that's more relevant to me on my Firepower. but the threat that comes through is something in the top 200. So in theory, it's always possible that the MX could defend a little bit better. But if I'm putting my eggs into a particular basket, I'm probably leaning towards the Firepower because it's specific to me. It is looking at the machines behind me and giving me the best protection for those kind of machines. If the customer has any kind of security engineer who might be actually doing some kind of threat hunting and more continual evaluation of their environment, there is a lot more reporting you can get out of the Firepower. That's not really surprising, right? Meraki is building their brand from a simple perspective. So you go in and you turn on malware inspection on their firewall. That's literally all you do is you press the button. I would like malware inspection. Thank you. Now it's running. For IT managers that are overworked and overloaded, that's music to their ears. That's all I want to have to do. Please give me malware inspection. For a security engineer, they want a lot more. They want a lot more in-depth reporting and analysis and figuring out what their top hits are. And all of that kind of reporting is built into Firepower and can be exported into different threat analysis tools. So generally, if there is some kind of security engineer in the room or in the organization, they're going to want some of those more sophisticated capabilities. Meraki's going to give you the simple answer and do a really good job in as much as a simple answer can. Cisco, as is typical with Cisco, gives you every knob to turn and switch to flip that you could want. So that is the other kind of delineating factor. Somebody that wants to play with the firewall is going to be a lot more satisfied with a Cisco firewall than a Meraki one. So, I don't want to give the impression that the Meraki does an ineffective job. For what it is, from a simple perspective, I think it does a great job. You still are getting the same IPS engine SourceFire that Cisco uses in their high-end firewalls. You're still getting the same malware inspection engine, AMP, that Cisco uses in their high-end firewalls. It's just that they're not able to be tuned to your environment as specifically. So that can be the difference in in mitigating some threats, and you're not going to be able to tweak them for your environment the way that you want to. You're going to be able to turn on latest and greatest firewall inspections with the click of a button, and for some people that's exactly what they want. I don't want to worry about it. I don't want to be in my firewall tuning it day and night. And so those are kind of the two things that I see as big differences between the two offerings.